Boris Johnson facing a bruising cross-examination by MPs at Partygate this afternoon. Before that starts at 2 p.m, let's speak to Conservative MP Peter Bone, a long-standing defender of the former PM throughout Partygate, with us now. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Always great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Is he fighting for his political life today?
Not really. I mean, what it is a part of the process of the Privileges Committee. He will present, he's already presented his evidence, which is pretty strong in his favour, and he will answer the questions for quite a considerable amount of time today, which I'm sure everyone will be interested in. Then the committee will go away, mull over these things and reach a decision. If
the committee decides that he should be suspended, and he's suspended for 10 days or more, he could face a by-election.
Well, that's not quite right. The committee can only recommend to Parliament, then the whole of the House of Commons votes on whatever.
That was my shorthand, but that's what I would say.
And, I mean, I don't think for one moment they're going to reach that decision, because if you look at objectively, to say that Boris Johnson knowingly lied to Parliament...
Misled.
Well, knowingly misled, lied, it's the same thing, isn't it? It's just... there's no evidence of it. I mean, haven't they had thousands and thousands of WhatsApp messages, and they've been going on for this inquiry for 10 months and found nothing?
That's not quite what the committee is saying. They've released their preliminary findings ahead of Mr Johnson appearing before them, as you know, and it would suggest that they don't think that that's the case, and he very much has a case to answer.
Well, I don't think they've reached a conclusion. I'm sure they haven't reached
preliminary findings.
Yeah, well,
we're being very pedantic this morning, aren't we? Have you had 3 shredded wheat?
Well, you know, getting up early and the excitement of coming on your programme. I did have my breakfast before coming.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm sure that Boris Johnson will need a good breakfast before he gets in front of this
probably
committee,
asleep, Boris, at the moment.
As well. But, you know, they do think he has a case to answer, which is why he's up in front of them.
Well, this is the primary facial thing about, well, it might be a case, so you look at there's an inquiry. And it's sort of based on the Sue Gray investigation. We now know that Sue Gray is, going to be Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer.
Potentially.
And they were having discussions while the investigation was going on.
No, they weren't. They were having...
Now, who's been pedantic? Have you had your shredded wheat this morning?
I don't like shredded wheat, but if I did, I would have.
Well, actually, nor do I.
Yeah, no, she was having discussions with them during the committee investigation, not during her actual investigation.
I'm glad you corrected me.
Not at all.
But you wouldn't... You will... I mean, if they are calling witnesses, presumably Sue Gray would be called, and she is now... very closely involved with the leader of the Labour Party, which must... I mean, I don't think in a court of law that would be allowed. It would be clearly a conflict of interest.
But so many of your colleagues sat there over the previous months during the investigation saying we must wait for the Sue Gray inquiry because she is a very independent civil servant.
And we didn't know at that time... Well, I've said it, as I said in the House of Commons, I think the fact that a senior civil servant has gone straight from that role to being a senior advisor to the leader of the Labour Party.
What are you
drives a coach and horses through our civil service.
Be careful, because, of course, you're not protected by parliamentary privilege sat there. What are you suggesting? Are you suggesting that she is biased towards the Labour Party and so she came up with those conclusions?
No, what I'm saying, and I said it in the House of Commons, that, you know, we have this tradition of the civil service being there to advise people of any political persuasion, and they don't then go and join a political party. And that's what is strange, and it breaks with the tradition, and it's more like we're moving towards the American system where you appoint people who believe in what you do, and then when you leave, you change them. It's a big question for the civil service.
What do you think was going through Boris Johnson's mind then when he was eating cake on his birthday and was raising a glass of wine in photographs that we've seen, and was aware of at least 14 events that were taking part in Downing Street, and was also fined by the Metropolitan Police?
Well, I mean, the only event that he got fined for was the cake when he was having a work meeting, and somebody turned up as a surprise piece of cake, which, by the way, was published at the time. In fact, it was in the Times newspaper, and nobody thought anything of it. It wasn't pre-planned by Boris, and so none of the other...
So why did he accept that he'd broken the rules?
Well, because the police found him guilty of doing it. But that was the only event, wasn't it?
He didn't have to accept that fine, did he? He could have challenged it in court. He chose not to.
Well, I'm sure he could have done. But the point is, you're saying he was at all lots of these different, what you would call parties, but he wasn't.
No, I was saying he was at 14 separate events, and that's what he will have to be answering. What did he think they were?
Well, they were work meetings, yeah.
And do you often have wine at work meetings?
I don't drink.
OK. Well, that's.
Do you? I mean, look, I mean, when Sky
have
has a
yours.
business meeting, do you occasionally have a drinks with it?
We don't tend to. No, we don't have
on occasion?
alcohol.
On occasion?
We don't have
On
alcohol
occasion?
on the premises. And if you have
Perhaps
to
off the premises.
well, exactly so. We certainly do then. We'll have to wait and see what happens as far as whether the committee believe him today. It is 4 Conservatives. The head of the committee, the chairperson, of course, is Labour, and then we have SNP and Lib Dem as well.
Can I just, on that, the only thing I would say about the committee, and I'm a great fan of parliamentary committees, is I'm very surprised that when the previous chairman stood down because he'd prejudged it, Chris Brighton, the right to stand down, the replacement was a former interim leader of the Labour Party, twice interim leader of the Labour Party, had already prejudged the matter. I thought that...
Do you think she's biased as well?
Well, I'm just saying it's strange, isn't it? I could have thought of a lot of Labour MPs who hadn't prejudged it, who could have been chairman. But I thought that was rather...
So are you saying she's biased?
Pardon?
Are you saying she's biased?
I'm not saying... I'm just saying it's unusual.
OK, as long as you're not saying she's biased, because obviously they would have something to say about that. Let me talk quickly about the vote today, Northern Ireland Protocol. Boris Johnson says he is going to vote against it. What are you going to do?
Well, we were promised...
It's one particular aspect, I should say.
Yes, that's the point you're making. Yeah. We were promised a full debate on the Windsor framework, and we would have a whole day debate and then we'd vote on it. What we're actually being asked in 90 minutes is to vote on one specific
the Stormont break,
which is then apparently going to be our vote on the whole framework. Now, if I get a question at PMQs, I'm going to ask the Prime Minister what happened to our wider vote. So I'm really pretty miffed that they are avoiding, the government's avoiding scrutiny on this. And on the break itself, it seems to fail all the tests. In fact, it's sort of be worse than useless. So if that is the case, I'm going to listen to the debate. I'm going to go to meetings this morning. But if I had to vote at this moment in time, I should vote against.
Let's wait and see. Let's see if you get a question at PMQs. If you do, you'll be on the telly because we're covering it live from noon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, always.